Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 322, Real Communication, Regulated, Respectful, and Responsible. Well, welcome back to this month where we've been talking all about how to stay connected to ourselves when we're connecting with others. And we've been talking all month about what healthy versus unhealthy communication looks like. And this week, we're going to get a little deeper into it, and that is emotional maturity. And I can tell you, as a therapist and a coach, especially working with relationships, emotional maturity is everything when it comes to having a healthy relationship, and essentially you can't have one without it. Now, I know we throw around the phrase good communication all the time. It's so overused. But what's interesting is what a lot of people might think is good communication is actually just conflict avoidance, like being nice and being agreeable and uber positive, maybe explaining ourselves to death. Well, that's not maturity. Mature communication is steady and grounded, and it's more honest. It owns feelings without leaking them, and it respects the other person without over-accommodating them. So what do I mean by mature communication? The first big aspect is emotional ownership, owning your feelings. You hear me talk about that all the time here because it's so important. So no blaming, no character attacks, no mind reading. It's about describing your internal experience to the other person, not prosecuting them, not focusing on them, not prosecuting someone else. And when we're hurt, our nervous system really wants that safety. And one way it tries to create safety is by building a case. We gather evidence. We line up examples. We prove our point. We present history. It sounds like you always. Last time you did this too. This is just like the time when you. See, this is why I can't trust you. Everyone would agree with me. Yes, we might have to have a come to Jesus every once in a while with someone. We don't want this to be the only way we're talking because you're no longer describing your experience. You're arguing for a verdict. You're trying to win. Now, the one caveat to this is when you're dealing with someone who manipulates and does the circular arguments and all the things, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about normal communication between two humans, where hopefully people are being somewhat emotionally honest. So what does mature communication sound like instead? Well, it doesn't build a case. It just describes the impact. It's what I coach relationships around all the time. You just give them information about you and then you let go. And you allow the other person to decide what they want to do with that information. So impact means instead of, you never listen, you always interrupt and you did it again, which is really shaming, right? Instead, you want to say something like, when I was talking and got interrupted, I really felt dismissed. It's short, it's specific, it's present focused. There's no jury, there's no closing argument, and there's no character assassination. We don't need to do that. You're never going to shame anyone into good behavior like Brené Brown says. If I prove how wrong you are, maybe I'll feel safer. Did you hear that? But mature expression says, if I clearly state how this affects me, I'll respect myself. So the first one tries to control. You're really hoping the other person will fess up and take the blame so you'll feel safer. But mature communication gives the other person a choice to align with where you are or not. Prosecuting often backfires anyway. Because you know what happens. First, the other person is just going to be so busy defending themselves, they can't even really listen and hear what you want them to hear. And then the conversation quickly becomes more about facts and not each person's feelings. The biggest problem, I think, is trust starts to erode, and both people really feel attacked. So here's the thing. Even if you end up being right, you're going to lose connection. What we really want to understand is that prosecuting often hides vulnerability. Underneath all that case building that you're doing, it's usually, I felt hurt, I felt unimportant, I felt scared. But we know that those feel riskier to say. So we argue instead. And it's the safer way to be heard because we're so afraid of being vulnerable and putting everything out there. But what's so sad is without others hearing our heart, we won't ever really feel known or validated, which is what we needed in the first place, which is what we were arguing for. So prosecuting, you say something like, you always cancel on me and you never prioritize this relationship. And last month you did the same thing. Mature communication says, when plans change last minute, I really start to feel unimportant. And I need more reliability if we're going to keep planning things. Do you see the difference there? It's huge. Prosecuting says, you're so defensive, you can't even handle any feedback. Mature communication says, when I tried to bring that up and the focus shifted to explaining, I really felt unheard by you. Prosecuting says, you don't respect my boundaries. And mature communication says, when I've said I can't do that and it keeps coming up, I'm really starting to feel pressured. So the key difference is prosecuting obviously attacks the other person. It's very much a you focus, and it attacks their character. It focuses more on them than their behavior. But mature communication describes behavior and, most importantly, the impact on you. One is global, one is specific. One says, this is who you are, but mature says, this is what happened and this is how it affected me. So essentially, we're practicing detachment from the outcome, and the ball goes to them and we're allowing them to choose. Most of us care about how we impact people. If we don't, we have a whole nother problem to deal with. Like a manipulator or narcissist is not going to take that in and really, really care and want to change. But everyone else does. And so when you let go and tell them, you'll find out. That ball will go to them and they'll be in a total place of choice. Even if they come back 2 days later and say, you know what, I really thought about what you said and you're right. Me getting defensive really made you feel unheard. And I don't like when people do that to me. And I really want to work on that. So you let go of control. But here's what a lot of people don't realize is that when you just share your subjective truth, they can keep their defenses down and actually maybe hear you and take that in on their own volition when they're ready. If they're ready. So a big part of this is not going to, which means regulating before we respond. You can feel angry and you can feel hurt and you can feel all the things, and I want you to honor your feelings, but you don't get to weaponize those feelings. And it really makes us emotionally unsafe to be around. So maturity means taking a moment, pausing, not texting in the heat. And this is hard. We have to practice this. This is a process, and we don't do it perfectly because you're so afraid. Like, if I don't pounce right now, what if they forget? What if they don't understand? And my answer to that is, oh, sweetie, if they forgot, we got a bigger problem. If you can't wait 15 minutes, an hour to respond to something, and they've already moved on, we have a bigger problem. Maturity means trying not to escalate the volume. And I know that we can do this out of so much fear that we won't be heard or valued if we don't escalate it. But we have to step aside and say, wait a minute, if I'm that afraid they're not going to take me seriously. Maturity also means not punishing people with the silent treatment. You don't have to shut down to be safe. So all of this is where healthy detachment comes in. Yes, that detachment we've been talking about a lot lately, because you're not trying to control the outcome. You're just trying to express your truth as calmly and respectfully as you can and letting go of what they do with it. So essentially, it's what I call directness without the harshness and without the passive-aggressive behavior. There's no hinting. There's no sighing loudly. There's no it's fine. There's no more other passive-aggressive things that we can do. Instead, it's very direct, which it can be very vulnerable. You say something like, I'm really not okay with that. Or I'm sorry, that just doesn't work for me. It's simple, it's calm, it's uncluttered, it's your truth. It is your truth. Whatever's really going on for you. Whatever boundary you really need to share. Now, I want to also talk about empathy. Empathy without self-abandonment. And this is where a lot of us struggle. Because many of us were taught that empathy means agreement, and it doesn't. Or that understanding someone means we have to minimize ourselves, and it doesn't. Mature communication says two things at the same time. One, I want to understand your perspective, and my experience still matters. It can be both. It doesn't have to be either or. In fact, so many things in life are both and. And if you struggle with that all or nothing, perfect or horrible, black and white thinking, it's going to be hard for you at first, and it's changeable. So what does self-abandonment look like? Well, when empathy turns into self-abandonment, it sounds like, I get why you did it, or it's okay, I'm probably just overreacting. You hear the backpedal? Or don't worry about it. So guess what? You start explaining their behavior better than they do. And then you shrink your own hurt to keep the peace. That's fawning. That's fawning and a little bit of fixing mixed in. You rush to soothe them before you've even acknowledged yourself. And here's the subtle part. You leave the conversation feeling so yucky and resentful, but you call it being understanding. That's not maturity. That's fear of conflict. That's a trauma response, or a blend of 3 trauma responses, depending what your history is. So I don't want you to feel bad about that if you do that, but I do want you to get some healing around that. On the flip side, lack of empathy, immaturity sounds like, God, you're so sensitive. Or, well, that's just how I am. Or, you're wrong. Now, that's self-protection without empathy. It protects the ego, but it sure does damage connection and emotional trust. So true emotional maturity sounds slower, more grounded, more regulated. Things like, I can see why that would have felt stressful for you, and I understand that you didn't mean to hurt me, but it still did. Or, I hear that you were overwhelmed and I still need more notice next time. Do you hear the steadiness in that? There's no collapsing, there's no rescuing, there's just reality and respect. So we can't talk about this without talking about the nervous system piece, because this is hard when your nervous system doesn't like holding up 2 truths. If you grew up managing other people's emotions, avoiding conflict, walking on eggshells, well, guess what? That empathy feels a lot safer than being assertive. So you lean towards, I understand, but you stop there. You stop there. And here's what's key. Maturity requires tolerating discomfort, which means it requires allowing someone else to maybe feel guilty, feel frustrated, feel defensive, sit in whatever shit they got to sit in, without you rushing in to manage it. That is bravery, and it's very strong, and it's risky. You have to risk losing the relationship you thought you had with them in order to have healthy with them now. So there's validation versus agreement. Validation says, hey, I understand why you feel that way. Agreement is different. Agreement says you're right, and they are not the same. You can validate someone's disappointment without disagreeing that you did something wrong. That's detachment in action. Just because this doesn't mean that. You can validate someone's anger without agreeing that their reaction towards you was appropriate at all. You can validate someone's fear without abandoning your boundary. That's what we call advanced level emotional maturity. This is a process. This is what I help people do. So what does it feel like when you start getting this right? Well, you don't have to leave conversations replaying everything for hours in your head. You don't feel as shaky. I'm going to say as shaky because doing new things is going to create its own little blip of anxiety. That goes away. You don't feel like you sold yourself out. You certainly feel more aligned with yourself. Like a lot of clients say, Mary, at the end of the day, what I feel is relief. And I say, I'm sure you do. You just told them your truth. You validated yourself out loud. So you may feel uncomfortable, but you're going to feel aligned with self. And your insides are going to match your outsides. And what I talk about all the time is, over time, this is what builds self-confidence and self-trust. Because you're no longer disappearing to maintain connection. You're participating honestly in it. Empathy without self-abandonment sounds like, hey, I care how this affected you too, and I care how it affected me. That's not cold, that's mature. And if someone can't tolerate both of those being true, well, that tells you something very important. So we can't talk about this without touching more on boundaries. Because boundaries mean the follow-through. Your words are real. And mature communicators don't repeatedly explain their boundaries. That's what's key, because that's control. Yelling at your kid 3 times to clean the room is control. That's not a boundary. So they don't argue about reality. They detach from the outcome, meaning the outcome of the other person being able to A, know the value of healthy boundaries, B, be able to respect them, and C, maybe have their own. They say, hey, if that continues, I'm really going to need to step back. And then they actually do. It's real. There's congruence. And it becomes the new reality in the relationship. And if they do this consistently, it builds trust. So let's talk about where communication just quietly falls apart. The over-explaining, like we talked about last week. When you don't trust your no, you just add paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. Well, that just signals anxiety and it invites debate and it weakens your clarity. Mature communication is more concise. If you feel that urge to justify excessively, that's a self-trust issue. And it also might mean you're dealing with someone who has tried to gaslight you out of your reality in the past. Here's one we don't talk about enough, pre-apologizing. Saying, I'm sorry, but, or I don't want to upset you, but. That's fear talking. You're trying to prevent them from reacting. You're allowed to have needs and boundaries without apologizing for having them. You're not responsible for their immaturity, only your own. You're not responsible for their trauma responses, only your own. And we can't talk about all of this without talking about emotionally leaking out. And this is subtle, but it's extremely important if you want to have emotional safety in your communication. What do I mean by leaking it out? Well, you're not saying it directly, so it's got to come out sideways. You're going to say things like you're fine, but your tone is sharp. You withdraw and call it space. Maybe you make snarky comments or passive-aggressive digs, or you don't talk much, you mutter. Unowned emotion always leaks out no matter who we are. And we need to own now how awful it can feel to be on the other side of that. We know how that feels. And that's really important to remember. Maturity means naming what you're actually feeling and not making other people guess. And then scorekeeping. Well, I did this for you, or you always, you never. Guys, that's resentment that wasn't addressed early on. And that means we didn't take responsibility for our choices in the beginning. Or at least notice like halfway through, crap, I'm starting to feel resentful, victimized. They try to deal with things when they're small, not when they've built a case file. And then they don't put their circumstances on other people. They try to own their part. And then there's defensiveness disguised as explanation. So you hear feedback from someone and you immediately correct the details without validating anything that they're saying that they're feeling or that they need. And that sounds like, well, that's not exactly what happened, or it wasn't Tuesday, it was Wednesday, or I didn't say that, I said something different. And on the surface, it looks harmless, right? You're just clarifying. But underneath, what you're really doing is you're trying to fix it because you're protecting your image. It's ego. So the moment someone shares impact on them, you move the conversation into some technical accuracy instead of just emotional understanding. And just remember, even if the details are soft, that's not the point and that's not what matters. It's how they're feeling. Mature communication does not prioritize being factually precise in most situations. It's more interested in what's really going on for that person. What are they telling me? And why would it matter for me to honor that? I don't have to agree to show empathy. Another thing we can do is we can hear feedback and immediately explain the context. And we can all be guilty. I know I've been guilty of this myself. Saying things like, well, I was really exhausted. Or you have to understand, I've had a really rough day. Now, context matters, of course, because you're trying to tell them, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt you with that. But timing matters more here. Because when someone shares hurt and you immediately explain yourself, you know what they're hearing? They're hearing, let me tell you why your experience makes sense, but I'm not actually really responsible. Ouch. And boy, we don't like it when folks do it to us. So that explanation can really quickly become self-defense. Mature communication takes a moment and says, wait a minute, let me first do empathy and everything else second. It says, oh, wow, I can see how that landed. And then I know it's no excuse, but can I share what was going on for me too? That order of business changes everything. Immaturity says it wants to shift the focus. Boy, does this happen all the time. Well, you do that too. Well, what about when you do? Or, okay, but this relationship isn't just one-sided. So then, now it's about competition. And it's shifting the focus away from what they're trying to tell you, because it's protecting you from being uncomfortable. But it really prevents repair, and it can really mess with a relationship. I've seen relationships end over this. Because maturity means we can tolerate being in that hot seat for just a minute without flipping the script. It says, wait, let me try to understand what's going on for them, even though this really sucks. You can say things like, I can see how it felt that way, or that really wasn't my intention, but I understand the impact. So this is hard, but good stuff. And mature communication requires we regulate our nervous system the best we can. And we work on healing that. And we work on tolerating discomfort. We work on boundaries and detachment, like letting other people have their feelings. And we work on trusting ourselves enough to be clear. And that takes coaching and support and practice and screwing it up and more practice and coaching and support. So I want to close with a few things for you to think about. And I want you to answer these questions for yourself. First one is, where do I subtly break down and do these things Mary's talking about today? Do I over-explain? Do I have a hard time sitting in the uncomfortable? Do I leak my emotions out instead of naming them? Am I more passive-aggressive and indirect? Am I too nice and dishonest? Remember, learning how to have more mature communication isn't about perfection. It's about practice and alignment. It's about matching your tone with your truth and that your boundaries match your words. And that the more you practice this, the better you will feel about yourself and the better people will feel around you. So if you're noticing that this is really an area you want to work on, check out the show notes. There's some links in there to my course, Find Your Voice. There's a new PDF download that's really inexpensive, and that's Say What You Need. There's free boundaries resource. I have the resources for you, and I'm here to support you as well. Because confidence isn't loud, it's congruent, and communication becomes really powerful, I think, when it's grounded in ownership and empathy and boundaries all at one time. And that's what I help people do, and I watch their lives change dramatically, which is why I do this work. So today we talked about how mature communication isn't about being polished and agreeable or endlessly patient or defensive. It's about ownership, emotional regulation, empathy, and boundaries. And we contrasted immature and mature communication and the subtle ways that our conversations can so quickly become derailed with rescuing and defensiveness and pleasing. And so if you've ever left a conversation feeling drained and misunderstood or slightly resentful, hopefully today you know why. And if you're working on this, be so proud of yourself. Pack your patience. It is a process. It's a little bit as you go, but don't give up because the payoff is amazing. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and sharing in the work that I think is so important. Reach out if you need support and be proud of all the progress you've made so far. All right, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.